Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for this training. If you are logging in, I know that you are unfortunately facing the reality of trying to figure out your next steps towards divorce. And I want you to know that I have been where you are, and I know how incredibly terrifying and overwhelming that entire thought process is. And so the goal today is to really getting you feeling like you have a plan or that there is a path forward for your family that is not destructive like the traditional system. So I'm Regina DeAngelis. I am the founder and creator of Family Transitions, Divorce Coaching and Mediation. And today's seminar is all about how to have a cooperative divorce. And there really are three key secrets to how to have a cooperative divorce without spending tons of money on lawyers and traumatizing yourself and your kids in the process. So, what family transitions is a better way to transition your family out of your marriage and into what I like to call a two household family unit. So you can create a step-by-step smooth family transition that saves months of time, thousands of dollars, and untold emotional trauma for yourself and your kids. But you have to avoid some really important pitfalls and traps along the way. So the program that I walk my clients through is called the 21st Century Family Transition. And it's a new model for ending your marriage that gives you the emotional and the logistical or informational information, the practical information that you need to methodically move forward to your next chapter in a very step-by-step way. So you don't feel overwhelmed and you don't feel frozen in fear, because we all know that that gets you stuck. So my clients, when people call me, they always say, seriously, like, how does this work? And I tell everyone it works even if you think your spouse won't cooperate, even if there's been a traumatic ending to your marriage, like an affair, and even if everyone you know is telling you you need to run out and get a lawyer, it works no matter what your marriage situation has been. In the United States, 85% of divorces are filed or initiated by women. So I say that just so that you keep in mind this idea. 85%, that's a big percentage. The point is that most divorces, the vast majority, are not mutual. It is one person or the other calling it, and saying, you know what, we've really done our best, but it is time for us to move in separate directions. And what I want to point out to you is that if you're in a situation where your spouse is saying, like, I don't want a divorce, I think we can go back to counseling or whatever, do not let that keep you frozen in this place. Like, I promise you that once your reluctant spouse understands that your desire is to preserve family ties as much as possible, to move you through calmly and efficiently, your spouse gets on board. Especially after you tell them that the average divorce, and this is average, and this is a negotiated divorce without fighting anything out in the courthouse. The average divorce in the United States costs a family $30,000. That's each of you go out and get an attorney. You each pay initial retainer fees of $3,500 to $5,000 and up. And your lawyers very quickly eat through that $5,000 a piece and start giving you monthly bills to continue moving you forward in the divorce process. I very much believe that every penny that's wasted on attorneys is literally wasted. if you choose to move forward in a way that preserves assets, that's money that you're going to need to set yourself up for the future or to pay for your kids' college education. Whatever it might be, it's certainly better in your pocket than the lawyer's. And so when spouses come to me and say, my husband or wife will never agree to this, they want to fight it out. Usually when you point out the cost savings, they get on board. And by usually, I mean like 100% of the time. Okay. So here's just an example of what you could create for yourself if you choose to do a family transition as opposed to a traditional process. But what I really want to point out is this center one where it says, I truly never thought I'd be sitting here feeling okay and maybe even good about the divorce. I hope others who were as broken as I was by the decision of their spouse can be encouraged by my story. Okay, so this was written to me by a reluctant spouse, someone who did not want a divorce. And as we walked through the process, what the reluctant spouse realizes is that if you want a divorce, your spouse isn't being treated the way they deserve to be treated either. And it's not intentional, it's not vindictive. It's just that clearly, if your relationship was healthy and thriving, you wouldn't be wanting a divorce. And when we go through this process and we alleviate the fears that you're going to destroy everything you've built and your kids aren't going to be involved in your life or whatever your fears are, we address them. What happens is even the reluctant spouse feels free to like all of a sudden be themselves again, go out and rediscover themselves. So I just want to point that out as a hope for all of you who are thinking, oh, I don't know, my spouse might not ever get on board with this, right? So here's the thing. This is sort of where we start. You're sitting there terrified of the idea of divorce, but you have to recognize that that is not your fault, right? The traditional divorce process, the one that we all know, is literally designed to increase trauma. Society has this belief that divorce has to be destructive, and it's literally like goes all the way back to the Middle Ages. If you were going to be divorced, it was because somebody was horrible and you set up this destructive victim versus villain story that everyone is on board to, like, they want to know what side they're supposed to be on, right? That's how society has set it up. But what you're going to learn today is all about how to avoid falling into that trap that society has set up for us. It's actually way easier than you might think. All right. So here's the foundation. Number one, divorce doesn't need to be destructive. That is something that we have been conditioned to believe by the generations before us. So if you've ever looked at your friends going through this and thought, this is insane, there's got to be a better way, your instincts were absolutely correct. There does not need to be destruction involved in the divorce process. So how do you avoid that? It's by creating what I call a family transition or a 21st century family transition, which recognizes everything that we know about human nature and psychology, as well as the legal system in 2023. So this is actually really big. It's a new way to think about ending your marriage. And if you're serious about avoiding the expense and the trauma of the traditional process, then this training will hopefully have you feeling much better about your future and what options there are available to you. So the goals of today is for you to understand that really the only way to get divorced without traumatizing yourself and your kids and your bank account is to really consciously decide to transition your family outside of the system. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do this for your family. So first, before I dive into all of that, let me give you a little bit of my background so you know I know what I'm talking about. Divorce, unfortunately, has been my life and my world for 20 plus years. I started practicing as a family law attorney right out of law school. I did it all the way up till the point where I was getting divorced myself. And at that point, I really couldn't stomach it anymore. And the impact of my own divorce process, which was so ridiculous, given that I was a divorce attorney and could have written up and did write up all of the paperwork so we could be divorced. My husband insisted on litigating it. He didn't trust me. He didn't trust the negotiation process because I was a family law lawyer. So his lawyer, instead of saying to him, you know what, this is above board and your wife and I can work this out and it's fair, he insisted on litigating it, taking it to court every step of the way. And it took us years. It was completely ridiculous. And the punchline of that story is that the judge awarded me more than I had told him I would take when I wrote up our settlement agreement when we first got separated. So we got separated. I said, like, let me write up the paperwork. I wrote it all up. I divided our stuff. And he said, no way. And then literally 3 years later, we're finally in front of the judge. And the judge says he's going to give me more than I asked for then, 3 years prior. So you can imagine how that went down and like what that did to my husband's mental state and willingness to speak to me. And I thought, this is ridiculous. His lawyer never should have let it get that far. She knew from the very first week that what I had proposed was completely fair and well within the bounds of what the judge was going to order and actually was in his favor. But because he wanted to fight it out, she said, okay, I'll do whatever you want. And that's what happens when you get into the legal system. So because of this and because of my professional background, I have learned exactly what you need to do to avoid these traps for your family. So this is me and my kids. I'll move myself. So we do still have a lot of fun, but you know, I'm just a mom like anybody else. And I understood the fear of spitting out the words, I think this is over, we need a divorce, and all the friendships and the community ties that we had built and how to manage all of that. So I've built all of that into my process with my clients to really support them as they go through each of these phases, like telling your family, telling your kids, telling your friends. It really all needs to be handled a certain way so that your community is supportive of you as well. So bottom line, the traditional system is designed to destroy whatever you have left. And it takes families and makes them adversaries, literally. One of you has to be the plaintiff and one has to be the defendant. But if you go into the system and hire lawyers and do it the traditional way, it has to be that way. But you have the option to choose another path. So for your family, it does not need to be that way. So I did this, practiced traditional family law for 18 years before I started family transitions. And it was, I want to say disgusting, but like demoralizing. I felt awful. I'd come home from work feeling like total crap because it's really a crappy way to spend your life when you feel like you are part of the problem and really antagonizing the other side when you know that this can be very cut and dry, right? Every divorce has universal issues. This is actually very straightforward if you focus on the forward vision what you want in your future, as opposed to getting stuck in your past and why you want the divorce in the first place. So my divorce gave me an epiphany. Literally, I was like, I have the skills to help people do this outside of the system. And so I decided to be a force for good. And when people hire me, they're hiring a one-stop shop that's going to keep you out of the system, keep you away from lawyers, and it saves you all of the emotional trauma of the stress of the traditional process. You're still going to go through the grieving process that everybody goes through. But we're saving you thousands of dollars and tons of trauma and tons of time. So if I can help even one family, is what I thought originally when I started, then it, my life has much more purpose than it did before. And it's turned out that I've helped dozens and dozens of families, and that number is just growing every year. So Family Transitions was born, and it has been an absolute blessing to me and the families that I help. So the program that I have created is called the 21st Century Family Transition, but I'm going to give you in this training the foundation, so you can get started with this on your own. Whether or not you call me and you want to work with me, you still know the basics of what you need to do to move forward with your family. So this is just an example of some of my earliest clients. And what I tell people all the time is that we're going to honor where you've been. We are not dismantling or destroying your life of the last 25 years. You can't erase that. It's part of your history, and it needs to be honored, and especially if you have kids. And so I love that what she says here: in divorce, we have both learned that it is a transition and it does not have to be a fight. I'd love for the world to know that. So we will forever be friends, and I'm very proud of us. That is absolutely the goal. Not all of my couples are best friends when it's over, but all of them can feel very proud of the way they conducted themselves under the most stressful of circumstances. And that's really the message you want to be sending your kids. You do not go into battle with the person who you've shared your life with and you have children with. What you do is you say, this is really sad for both of us, and we know that it could be ugly, but we are choosing a different path for our family. And so it's really important. So the key to moving forward is to visualize what you want. Like, really close your eyes and imagine what your next chapter is. It probably is healthy, thriving kids, you in a loving relationship where your kids get to see what it really looks like to be with someone who honors you and loves you. And a lot of us are not in that situation. We're in marriages where you think, what are the kids learning from this? Right? So think of your positive future, the ideal future that you want for you and your kids. And then think about what a family transition looks like. So let's get into it, okay? We're going to talk about how you can end your marriage without destroying yourself, your kids, and your net worth, why you can do this even if you have no legal background, and why running to lawyers at the first inkling of divorce is literally the worst thing that you can do. Okay. So you can end your marriage without destroying yourself, your kids, and your net worth if you think of this process as a conscious family transition. We're going to go calmly, step by step, one thing at a time. So my epiphany around the traditional divorce process and what you are going to be learning to sidestep is this traditional process that keeps you buried in shame and blame. One of you is feeling ashamed of yourself. or blamed, the other one is embarrassed, and the toxic emotions around it send you into fear and fight or flight defense mode. You want to blame shift so that you don't feel shame. There's a lot of psychology around it, which you can look up. But blame shifting is really the key. If you listen to Brene Brown, she talks about it all the time. None of us want to feel shame. It's a biological instinct to avoid it. And that's what the divorce process does, though. It pulls you down into the basics of our biology and keeps us stuck in fear. And when we're stuck in fear and blame or shame, we lash out to defend ourselves. It's literally human instinct. So the only way to avoid that happening, number one, is to know it's instinct and it's going to happen. So when you catch yourself doing it, you can be like, wait, I know what's going on here. I'm not going to fall into this trap. And I also think that, practically speaking, to override basic human instinct, you need support. You need accountability partners. Like, you need someone to keep you on track. So whether that be me or a best friend or someone else in your community, someone to say to you, are you operating out of fear and shame, or are you focusing on that positive new future that you're trying to build for you and your kids? You absolutely need to avoid feeling like a victim or the villain. Okay, so that's the most important thing, because the truth is that neither one of you is a victim or a villain. You both did the best you absolutely could during your marriage. And I really believe that society sets us up to fail. We're told it's till death do you part. We get married when we're barely adults, don't know ourselves. But then also we fall into, I think, still really traditional gender roles, even though, we're well into the 21st century. Women can do whatever they want. Husbands are very much hands-on, supposedly. In a lot of cases they are, but I do know with my clients that it seems as though both parties are working their absolute tails off, and they're just so exhausted they cannot connect anymore. So that's why we have to grieve the sadness of that, the loss of expectation, but you think about what is happening next. What is your future going to look like when this is over? So even if there has been an affair, even if there's emotional abuse or narcissistic abuse, you can absolutely create a smooth family transition. So my clients, Michelle and Joe, they're a perfect example of that. And I was heartbroken for them when they came to me, because it was just like in almost all my cases, the wife reaches out and says, we need a divorce, but we've been together since we were teenagers or in college. And in this case, there was an affair and they were both heartbroken and grieving and had adult kids, and just nothing was like they expected it was going to be. And they both understood, though, especially when there's been an affair involved, that is like ammunition for the attorneys. And obviously, the spouse who was cheated on wants to lash out. So it takes coaching and support to say to that spouse, nobody ever wants this to happen. It's not a reflection of you, but it is a reflection of how empty and broken the marriage was, and there is better for you out there as well. So Michelle and Joe went through my program, and we'll come back to them in a little bit, but they actually ended up going their separate ways, but really maintaining a strong friendship, because they looked at their marriage as one of the most important time periods of their life, but recognized that in their mid 50s, they still had a whole lot of life to live. They were going to honor this chapter and they were going to move forward to be their best versions of themselves that they could be. So a lot of people come to me with the assumption that this new way of divorcing won't work because my spouse will never cooperate. And I talked about this a little bit. That's really usually complete BS, because once you tell your spouse that you want a divorce, but that you're choosing a method that's going to preserve assets and save time and avoid fighting, they have no reason to say no, because there's no downside to them, even if their only upside is they're saving money. So that usually is like a winning argument every time. And sometimes my clients come to me and say, my spouse refuses to do anything I suggest. And in reality, even if they refuse normally, what you have to recognize is once you hire somebody to help, or you say, hey, like I've enrolled in this course or this program that's going to guide us through, they realize that they're going to be divorced one way or the other. And again, you have the option to lawyer up. You're actually doing them a favor by doing it this way, and a favor for both of you. And when you hire me, my clients get the benefit of using me as what I call a pattern interrupt. So no communication about your divorce has to happen between you and your spouse. It's literally any issues are presented through the course to me, and I interrupt the traditional typical pattern that you have of just arguing in circles. So you just need someone to interrupt that pattern and you can make forward progress. This is a big issue that people come to me with a lot. They say it's impossible to get divorced without a lawyer when kids and assets are involved. And that's absolute BS. In fact, everything you need to know about divorce, obviously you can Google, okay? And like the actual law and code and everything and anything you could need to know is on the internet for free at your fingertips. So you could totally take the time and effort to do it on your own, or you could hire someone like me who's literally going to guide you through, not represent you legally, not argue your case in court, but guide you through and explain what all of this means so that you feel secure in making decisions. So do not subject yourself to the toxic system. You have got options. And if you have a computer, which I'm sure you do, or a phone, you can certainly Google how to get divorced in your state without getting lawyers. So everything you need to know about the legal system is on your computer, and you can drastically reduce the emotional and financial trauma if you take that information and you say, we're going to move forward slowly and methodically to create a step-by-step family transition. And so my epiphany about this, when I was transitioning myself from traditional family law into an actually new career, because I couldn't take it anymore before I started family transitions, I realized that what people wanted was information and explanation about what they were reading. They did not want legal games. And so all of my clients are given all of the information and explanations they need to understand, what assets are we dividing, what assets don't get included, what do we need to think about when we're dealing with custody, how do we figure out child support. That's it. Once you're given the explanation, you can apply it to your family. You do not need a lawyer to do that for you. So you want to keep control of the process, but you need the explanation first to know what you're doing. And so my other clients, Rachel and Rich, are a perfect example of this. They wanted to stay out of the system because they thought it was best for their family and their kids. But also, when they got into it, they had a very complicated divorce situation where they owned a business, the husband owned a business that was kind of a startup, right? Like it didn't really have any value yet, but they were concerned that it could have a lot of value down the road. Those kinds of issues, you want to be in control of what happens and talk about, are we going to split profits down the road? How are we going to share profits in the meantime after we're divorced? And so, again, creating that positive vision for your future, we work backwards. And the more complicated your divorce is, actually, the more important it is that you create a family transition and don't subject yourself to the traditional system. So my clients, when they first call me, sometimes they assume that this isn't going to work because we can't do coaching or mediation. We don't know anything about the legal system. And that's complete BS, because the issues around divorce are universal for every family. You need to be educated on what those issues are and make sure you don't miss anything. But once you have that information, you can easily apply it to your family. Okay. And people think, well, it's risky because I don't know what's supposed to be included and what's not included. And again, it comes back to that. It's a universal scenario for every family. So it's very straightforward. And once you're told, like, oh, this is how that works. If I inherited a bunch of money from my mother, this is how I deal with that. I give you all that information. Again, information you can find on your own, but sometimes you don't trust yourself to decipher or interpret everything you're reading. And so this program that I've created gives you all of that information so that you are not second guessing yourself. So it's not risky. The assumption, it's a risky situation if your family is unique. In fact, you want to stay out of the system if your family is unique in any way whatsoever. The system, by definition, it's like an assembly line at the courthouse. Every family is treated almost exactly the same. Support is by a formula. Asset distribution is within a certain range. It's a cookie cutter approach. So if you've got anything unusual, like a family business, like rental properties, like a child with special needs, you're going to want to stay out of the system, because the system isn't designed to handle unique circumstances. Alimony is an example of this that's sort of outdated. So the traditional alimony scenario is they come up with a flat amount and for a flat number of years. But working outside of the system, you can be as creative as you want with respect to how your incomes are going to be shared, how long, if alimony starts at one level and then decreases over time. But again, you tell me your vision and we work backwards from there. So there are no rules when you're staying out of the system. So practical information, universal to every divorce, gives you the flexibility to address your personal circumstances on your own. And you keep control of your family. And you actually, this is going to sound weird, but it's absolutely true. You literally build a feeling of sort of teamwork with your soon-to-be ex-spouse as you're figuring this out and deciding what is going to work best logistically and financially for everybody as we go forward. So the last secret is perhaps the most controversial. My lawyer friends, I don't even think my lawyer friends don't disagree with me. I was going to say they would, but they all know it's true, that it creates an absolute chaotic situation. But that's their bread and butter, right? But running out to lawyers when you first have a conversation with your spouse and say, I think we need to separate, running out to lawyers is actually the worst thing you can do. I say most of the time lawyers make the situation worse here, because I've got like lawyers, you can't be like create a blanket statement, but I'm going to tell you, in my experience of 25 plus years doing this, they always make the situation worse. It makes it more stressful. It makes it more costly, and that adds to the stress, and it makes it more time consuming. So even if your lawyer is fabulous, and some of them are wonderful humans, and I have great relationships with co-counsel, having two lawyers involved always makes the situation worse. So this is a horror story, worst case scenario I want to throw out there for you, just so you understand that this is how bad it can get. But Chrissy and Jason, they are separated, right? They have that big blowout fight. She says she's getting a divorce, and she goes to hire a lawyer. She goes for a consult with a lawyer. I get this question all the time. Someone says, he needs to go. Like, I can't live like this anymore. I need to get him out of the house. Your lawyer is going to say to you, unfortunately, you can't get him out of the house. He's got every right to be there until a court decides otherwise. And that's like the honest to God truth. So what the lawyers will say is, the only way you can really get him out of the house, if there's an abuse situation, then I can argue that the situation is so unhealthy that they need to be removed. And many, many, many times I've had people come into my office who have had this happen. That one spouse either instigates a fight or just flat out makes something up so that they have the ammunition they need to argue that there's been abuse, and the court will then forcibly remove the other spouse. So that's what happened in this case. And after they each spent $10,000 in lawyer's fees in the first 6 weeks, so $20,000 in 6 weeks, they called me and said, we can't afford this anymore. Like, can you help us unwind this and figure this out? And yes, the answer is absolutely always yes. It's never too late to back up and like dial it in and get on solid ground moving forward. And so that's what we did here. And they were able to work together to figure out what they were going to do with the house, the whole 9 yards to get to their settlement agreement. But lawyers have an obligation to tell one of you what is in your best interest, not the interest of the family. So the other myth that I have is lawyers are necessary to prepare the paperwork. And that's total crap also. Like I said, the paperwork is all online. You guys can figure it out if you want to do some downloading. But people are afraid to do that. So a lot of times clients come to me and say like, no, we want you to walk us through it. So again, it's not about legal games. It's just you need guidance to get you to that final, signature on the agreement. Lawyers are necessary to protect you. That's a huge myth because in fact, like on paper, it might look like they're protecting you, but in the end, by the time you have paid them what they charge, you are going to end up no better financially than you were, if you had agreed to something out of court. And my personal story is a perfect example of that. We talk about how angry my husband was, my ex-husband. I had made a proposal, I wrote up the paperwork. He said no, he wanted to fight this out with his lawyer. It took us another 3 years almost. So he's paying his lawyer all that time. And he then in the end, I get awarded from the judge more than what I had asked for initially. And so now he's paid his lawyer tens of thousands of dollars, and he owes me tens of thousands of dollars more than what I asked for originally. The lawyer can say, I was doing what he asked and he wanted to fight. He wanted his day in court, and they are correct. So the lawyer is not in the wrong. The lawyer didn't do anything wrong, but there was certainly no protection there for the client or our family, financially or emotionally. So the difference is that once you understand the issues, you don't need a lawyer to tell you what to do with your house. You just need to be told how to calculate the equity to know what value to put on it. And you guys can make the decision as to whether or not the house is being sold or somebody's keeping it, just as one example. And lawyers are not necessary to speak for you. And I think this is part of why it makes the situation so toxic. Even if you think you're going to have an amicable divorce, once you pay your lawyer thousands of dollars, you're afraid to talk to your spouse anymore. They don't trust you anymore for good reason. And you feel like you don't want to say something that's going to hurt your case in court. So the last little bit of ability to communicate with your spouse that you have when you go out and hire the lawyers is destroyed because you won't talk to each other anymore. And then think about what that does to your ability to co-parent when the divorce is over. And now you don't have lawyers anymore. And all of a sudden you have to start speaking with your spouse again. It's really a mountain to be climbed at the end that isn't necessary. You can keep control of the process from the beginning, use me or somebody like me to do a pattern interrupt. So you're not fighting. You are not fighting this out. You are evaluating the issues very deliberately and using a third party to help you reach a resolution. So you don't want to give your voice up and lose your power in your divorce process. So in reality, with my clients who do the 21st century family transition, like none of them get lawyers. I do have clients who every once in a while will get a lawyer at the end to review their document. And we talk about that a lot in the course, like when and if you should have a lawyer look at something. You always have that right, but nobody ever wastes money on lawyers after they have invested in my process. So it will ultimately absolutely save you months of turmoil, save thousands of dollars, and protect yourself and your kids if you choose to do a family transition process as opposed to going into the regular divorce system. Okay. So just to recap, you guys, please know and believe that you can end your marriage using an alternative path that is keeping you out of the courthouse, that you can do it even with no legal background. You can absolutely feel confident making decisions for yourself and being secure that you're not missing anything. Everything is being covered. And please, if you didn't know before, you know now some of the reasons. I can do a whole course just on the reasons why lawyers make the divorce process so toxic and really so destructive. So if nothing else, please avoid the trap of running out to lawyers at the first inkling that a divorce might be necessary. Okay. So if you want to start a healthy new chapter, think this through a little bit. Think, maybe jot down what that vision is for your future. Think about steps you can take to start moving into a healthy family transition. With my clients, it looks sort of like this. It's much faster, but we still want it to take 4 to 6 months because, again, it's a transition. The whole point is to avoid sudden and traumatic changes. You want to have time to find a new place to live, to evaluate your finances. It takes time, and you need to give your nervous system time to adjust to the new reality. So in week 1, we tackle what life is going to look like while you're in the house. What does separation even mean? What the finances are going to look like. Within month 1, we're starting to kind of practice a custody schedule while you're all in the same house. So the kids, when it comes time to being in 2 houses, don't even really notice that things are that different. And then after we get you running on that solid ground, you feel safe to start looking at the bigger questions of making bigger financial decisions about real estate holdings, about retirement accounts, splitting of assets in general. And then the last few months that we're together, we literally build your separation or settlement agreement and give you that legal document so you can sign it and take it to the courthouse. So a family transition in my program takes between 4 and 6 months. So please reach out to talk to me. Click the link below the video if you'd like to schedule a time to talk. It's absolutely free. And it's really just so that I can hear your situation and we can evaluate further whether or not creating a family transition through my program is something that might fit well for your family. But either way, you're going to get tips for taking those next steps towards building a separation for yourself, giving yourself some breathing room. So there's no downside. Please feel free to book a call and I will be happy to hear your story. So if I can be of any help to you, please reach out. And also don't forget to find me on Facebook at Family Transitions. So I wish you all the best. Just take it a day at a time and it will all fall into place. Thank you so much for your time.